welcome to this episode of Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today we are continuing our strike supporting coverage of Ahsoka. So it is episodes we're recording right as Ahsoka comes out. They're not going to be released until after the strike. And so if in between the time of recording and the time that they're released, we learned that Ahsoka was actually a Hutt all along in disguise, or that the actor or somebody secretly believes in Romanian space balloons, or whatever it is. We won't know about that, but it probably won't be a big deal anyway. We're just talking about the show as it comes out. I'm joined by my co-host for these episodes, as for many Star Wars things, Erin McGowan, Lady Tano Creates, taking some time before they head off to Dragon Con to be Ahsoka in all her glory amidst one of the best geek gatherings in creation. How are we doing today? How do we like this episode?
Episode was amazing. Lots of action. Ahsoka just fighting people on the wing of a ship is so iconic. Mm-hmm. It's so very Clone Wars. Like, remember when her and Anakin did that? That was so cute. So, I don't know. I loved that. It was funny. I liked and appreciated the continuation of Sabine being like, yeah, I don't have access to the Force. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
And Ahsoka's like, just do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting episode, and I really like how they're pushing, one thing I've kind of resolved too is not to get too into the kind of like internet debates and like the reason why people hate things and stuff like that when it's, it's totally fine to not like whatever, but the internet haters that Star Wars can often generate. But I appreciate that they are trying to, first of all, they're not holding back anything, like they're doing the stuff that is probably going to make some people angry for dumb reasons, and they're doing it and they're not caring. But as you said, it's all based on things. People will be like, oh my God, Ahsoka fighting with a lightsaber on the wing of a ship. That could never happen. No, it happened in Clone Wars,
Yeah. They're
referencing, the same old Mary Sue nonsense that Rey got, when people can come along and be like, well, how is Sabine so good with a weapon at all? She's a Mandalorian. She's a Mandalorian, and not only that, she was trained by Kanan to use the Darksaber. Like, she's been through this before. There's a lot of that basis there. And yeah, I thought this episode was just a lot of fun. I love the fight scenes. I'm just so interested in the world building and the characters, and I felt like we didn't get very much of that, but it felt like we moved some pieces into place to be able to really move things forward pretty fast.
Yeah. Like the description of the episode said, like, Hera deals with New Republic politics while Ahsoka and Sabine Wren, like, do something else. Right. And I was like, the episode ended and I was like, oh, okay. Like, we really only got, like, those two scenes with Hera, like, arguing with the senators, which, valid. There's probably not much more that they had to show. But, yeah, I agree. Like, I enjoy that, like, world building or, like, the politics. I did really enjoy seeing Jason.
Yes. Yeah.
Jason exists.
Awesome. Woo. So let's go through it. I'm going to assume that we've talked a lot about how this show is very much like a continuation of Rebels. And I know a lot of people haven't seen Clone Wars, haven't seen Rebels. I'm going to assume that by the time this has come out, there's been enough other stuff out there that has filled you in on some of those details, but we'll fill you in on some of it, especially who is this Jason person who Erin was so excited about. But let me kind of start by just giving you a quick plot summary, both for those people who maybe saw this when it came out, it's now been a couple months, they don't remember the details, or even if, like, I do think it's a very good show, I encourage people to watch it, but if you're not going to watch it, you want to just follow us along instead, that works too. So, I'm not going to remember the exact order in which these things happen, but there's a couple different storylines. And it all starts with, we know that the Empire is looking for Thrawn, and we know that Imperial agents have kind of penetrated into a lot of the New Republic, and then a lot of the former Imperial agents who've taken this loyalty pledge are not so loyal, and they attacked some of our heroes. And so Hera goes to see some of the real leaders of the New Republic to talk to them about this, and includes Mon Mothma, which is awesome to see. Her actress was in Andor. She's also been in a couple of the other things. She was the voice of Mon Mothma and some of the animated stuff. Mon Mothma being the I think it's a president, it's chancellor,
She's a chancellor.
I believe. But yeah, it's the head of the New Republic. And with her, a couple of other senators. And so in that storyline, Hera's trying to, as Erin mentioned, let them know Thrawn is back and that we're going to this planet called Denab, where we need to try to stop whatever these new people are doing to try to find Grand Admiral Thrawn. So Mon Mothma has the attitude of sympathy, like she would love to help, but there's just too much to do and they can't really do anything. Senator Ziano is a lot more antagonistic. He's one of the sort of advisors, and his position is that, look, the war is over. We don't want to restart the war. He doesn't really want to believe that he's like, they took a loyalty pledge. Everything is fine. He's very much like the head in the sand character. And so eventually she gets told she can't get any of the resources she wants. The New Republic's not going to help. Everyone's on their own. Meanwhile, Hera and Sabine are traveling to Denab to try and figure out what's going on. What's Droid Man's name? David Tennant?
Hu Yang.
Okay, I want to call him the Jedi Doctor, but that's not accurate. So Hu Yang, so he's with them, and he starts to sense that there's some very large object that's in space as they're approaching. It's not a Star Destroyer. They're not sure what it is. They're attacked by these fighter craft. There's 2 groups of 3, one of which is led by Shin, who's a kind of blonde, not Sith, but the apprentice to Balin. And then the other is by the Inquisitor. And there's a great space battle as they're attempting to shoot down the Ghost. Seymour the Ghost in action was just fantastic for those who remember it from Rebels. Sabine works in the tail gunner, and at first, like, her and Ahsoka are kind of like working at cross purposes, but eventually they figure out how to work well together. They almost win the fight. Shin damages the ship, but not enough, and Morgan kind of gets on her about that. They fly closer, and they realize that it is the huge hyperspace ring we saw being constructed. There's more fighting. As you mentioned, Ahsoka goes out on the wing of the ship while Sabine is piloting it. She does some great lightsaber stuff and destroys a bunch more of the ships. Shin then is mad at Morgan because even Morgan is not able to destroy her with the lasers of the cannons. But they do wind up still having the Ghost damaged enough that they crash on the planet of Denab. And in the final scenes, we see Balin talking to these, I think they might be purge troopers. I'm not sure exactly what. They're kind of like alien. They might be droids. They might be people, but they speak an alien language we haven't really heard much before. And he's ordering them to go hunt down the 2 people who crashed and kill them so that the plans can proceed. Oh, and we also learned that the hyperspace ring it's basically, if you remember in the Clone Wars movies, particularly in Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan flies his little kind of fighter ship into this big ring, and then the ring is what transports him through hyperspace. I think Dooku has something similar. It's a ring like that, but on a gigantic scale that no one's seen before, and that in theory it should be able to, as the Jedi did once eons ago, transport people not only through the galaxy but to another galaxy through hyperspace. And I think that's and the other last big detail is that while we are in the middle of this spice fight, part of how the Ghost gets away is by flying through the Purrgil, the space whales, who are presented in a really kind of like epic, majestic way that we'll discuss, but they are the Purrgil or the space whales. And for those who didn't see it, it's been referenced that the reason why Ezra and Thrawn have both disappeared is that they were basically taken away by these space whales at the end of the last episode of Rebels. That's what these creatures are. So, yeah, that's my summary. What did I miss?
I think you got most of it. I mean, we already talked about Jason, the Purrgil.
Morgan. Jason. So, yeah, quick mention. We see Jason towards the end. Jason is a small child. He's got green hair. And he doesn't have Leku, but his skin coloring is kind of a little bit similar to Hera's, but not really. And if you've seen Rebels, you know he's the child of Hera and Kanan, who was her lover, who was, I don't think they ever officially got married that we saw on screen, but they were life partners for sure. And he was the Jedi who was training Ezra. Yeah.
And he did get a little mention in this episode, if you caught it, because Hera was talking about Thrawn is like an intense adversary, like we need to pay attention to this, like it's not something to be ignored, like he's not like other Imperial admirals, he's killed people that I consider family.
Yeah. Now, so not mentioned by name, but definitely mentioned in an important way. Okay, so let's talk about the stories one by one. So first of all, what'd you think of Hera and the kind of insight into what's happening in the New Republic?
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like typical.
Yeah.
Like, the rebels asking the larger people for help, or like rebels, quote, quote, or, like the small squadron, it not being provided, whether we're talking about Rogue One, whether we're talking about countless episodes of Clone Wars or Rebels where they ask for backup and it's not given.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. It was great seeing Mon Mothma on screen, but I think that scene and that plot line was probably the thing that most disappointed me about the episode, because it just felt very repeated, and I felt like we didn't really get more of the reason why. Often, as you said, it's presented as from Anakin's perspective, there's no reason to do this, but if we know the whole picture, maybe we can understand. In this, Senator Ziano especially just seems like a cardboard cutout of he's got his head in the sand and he doesn't know what's going on, and so our heroes have to struggle on. And we've seen enough in Mandalorian to understand that the New Republic's resources are really stretched thin and people aren't happy with the decisions they're making. I get why they didn't want to do much of that.
Yeah.
Because to people who aren't like me, the politics is not the thing that they're super excited for. But I think I kind of wish they either had gone a little further and made it more of a relevant, interesting, a plot line that made sense, or it had just been Hera just says to them, I talked to the council and they said no. And they just didn't give us the scene.
Which, I mean, maybe they'll come back around to it. Maybe that's Senator Ziano, you said? Maybe he's an important character later on and they needed to introduce him in some way as a head in the sand type trope. But yeah, I agree. It wasn't, I don't know. It was just okay, cool, I guess. But yeah, it definitely didn't stick out to me as far as in the episode.
I mean, certainly him being that head in the sand, I think it's certainly plausible that he is actually an Imperial agent in some way.
Totally.
Which would be a little disappointing, because I prefer the story of the government that's trying to do its best, but it's just having real problems. But that would also help explain the kind of cartoonish level of idiocy from him. So,
but you did make a good point about the Mandoverse, kind of how if you've been watching along the other shows, even Book of Boba Fett, the New Republic really ain't crap. It really is doing maybe its best, but it's really not effective. And so I guess there wasn't a huge need to be overbearing and clarify that more, other than it's just okay, here are the people, as you can see, there's a real council, there's senators, and they're trying, but as you can also see, they don't have resources to do much.
Yeah I think it's very true.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about some of the more fun parts of the show. So something I didn't even mention, but we do get to continue Sabine's training as a Jedi, or at least as a Force user. And it's not going the best. How'd you think about how it was, what we got in that storyline this episode?
Yeah, I mean, it just felt realistic, right? She hasn't practiced anything with lightsabers in a long time. They do the classic, cover your eyes, try to fight your adversary. Doesn't work well.
It's pretty much it's not exactly the same, but it looks very much like the helmet that Obi-Wan has Luke put on in the first movie.
Totally.
A New Hope.
Yeah, it's very similar. But yeah, I would say I appreciated those scenes, because even though it's it didn't seem like much was done, here's a few things she tried, didn't work. But it was a good clarification of where Ahsoka and Sabine are at with one another.
Yeah.
Sabine's frustrated. She doesn't feel like she's doing well, but she does take a moment to clarify and say, I'm going to do my best. Or, I'm going to give this my best try.
Yeah.
And I feel like Ahsoka, recognizes that and is maybe the training's not going as well as we wanted, as Hu Yang points out. But, if I give her space, she's determined enough. She's a Mandalorian. She's stubborn.
Yeah.
She's going to figure it out.
Yeah, Hu Yang is very... C-3PO would often state really terrible things, but at least have some sympathy. He's just it's just the truth. The truth is, she's worse than any candidate that I've ever seen before.
Any battle on, ever.
Yeah.
It was funny.
Definitely. So then we get the space battle and all of that, which, as you said, talk a little more about what it meant to you, seeing Ahsoka, fighting with a lightsaber out on that ship wing.
It was just so cool. I will take this moment to say I didn't mention it last week, but her Lekku are incredible. They're beautiful. The fact that they listened to the feedback from The Mandalorian and extended the Lekku, even just those few inches, of course they're not as long as they were in Rebels, but like I've mentioned before on this podcast, as far as Togruta anatomy goes, depending on the stress and level of like trauma in your life, your Leku can shrink with age.
Right.
So like that's very plausible to me. But it's not just those stubby little, the way she looked in season 1 of the Clone Wars. Because I really hated those Leku. So I'm very happy that they gave her a better set for this show.
Well, and I want to ask, because we know you're a cosplayer. We've done a whole episode with you on that. My understanding is that part of the reason why they made them shorter was because for Rosario Dawson, the actress, to wear them, like the longer they are, the heavier they are, and the harder it is for her to move with them. As someone who has now cosplayed and worn Leku a couple of times yourself, what sympathy do you have for that particular argument?
I mean, honestly, not much. Like, I really don't. Okay. Because it's like the ability of like props and prosthetics these days, like you could have made them longer. Like, have you, like, literally back in the prequels, we had like Shock T fighting, not super intense fights, but we saw her fighting. Her Leku are like 4 feet long, you know? So it's like, I know you guys know how to do this, and it's been 20 some years. You can definitely find a lighter material that's still flexible. You can definitely find a way to secure it to her head. So like, I don't know. I always saw that as an excuse. Just looking at prosthetics throughout all of film right now, all of cinematography. Like, look at Lord of the Rings. Like, there's just incredible things that you can do.
Right. That's
so fair. I was glad they like put their minds to it, because I believed that it was possible the whole time.
Okay, that's fair. I will say, and this is not to discount anything you say, I literally, like, I rewatched those episodes of Mandalorian recently, and then, of course, watched this last night. Didn't notice a difference. Like, it just does not...
Really?
That's a detail that my brain just does not catch in the slightest. So I remember being kind of baffled that it was something people were bothered by, because it seemed so insignificant. But also hearing you, especially for someone who is cosplaying it, hearing about why it's so significant and how it does change how you see the character definitely does mean a lot to me. Yeah,
because, I mean, I'm going to be honest, like, I hadn't watched Rebels when I first watched The Mandalorian, so I was a little confused as to Ahsoka's characterization, because she changes a lot between Clone Wars and that show, Rebels, and then, again, until Mandalorian. But I was just kind of like, I don't connect with this character. Like, this, you're telling me it's Ahsoka. This is a face I've never seen before. The skin color is a little different than I'm used to, like, on screen, like, animated. And these Leku look nothing. They're not the right color. They're not the right length. They're barely the right shape. Like, it just didn't feel like her when I saw her in The Mandalorian. Yeah. So it was like, okay, this is kind of like, in my mind, those were separate Ahsokas. Like, obviously the same, but it's like, this is a separate actress. This is not the character that Ashley built. This is something new and different. Which, I mean, could go either way as far as animation to live action. Like, of course, you want to put your own into the character. But there's certain ways that you can do it that are more smooth. Like I said on the last episode last week, like, the characterization of Sabine, it's incredible. And, like, that actress had gone out and said, like, yeah, like, I'm taking a lot of notes from the show, but I'm going to make Sabine my own. Like, I don't want to do a carbon copy. And she did a really great job, in my opinion, because that character feels exactly the same. Yeah. Now, if I had seen Rebels before I first ever saw Ahsoka and The Mandalorian, I probably would have understood and felt that the character was more similar than I felt it was at the time. But... Yeah,
you saw version 1 and version 3, and I'll say
exactly
when I first saw Rebels and saw Ahsoka in that, at first she did seem odd, and the biggest thing was that her face looked so different. So different. And I had to remind myself it's because she's aged. She's not a child. She's now someone in her probably like earlier mid-20s. Or whatever's the equivalent, because I think we shouldn't assume that like all species age at the same rate. But she's definitely
live a little longer than humans, but not that much.
Yeah, she starts basically as a tween, and then by the end she's kind of a mid to late teenager, and now she's an adult. And yeah, so it totally makes sense how those transitions can happen. And yeah, it was definitely a really fun fight scene. It went a little longer than I would have liked, and I kind of felt like I at least wanted to see Shin and the Inquisitor. They seemed like they were better pilots than the others, but I didn't get any sense of the, like, you know, we've seen that Force-sensitive pilots are just able to do incredible things. And some of that's like Anakin and Luke were some of the very best, but like most of the Jedi, certainly Plo Koon or, some of the others who, when they were piloting, were really able to do pretty incredible things. And I felt like if we're going to get Shin and in the Inquisitor in those ships for, like, I don't think we saw them at all outside the ships this episode. I would have liked to have them do something that's more like the Force related rather than, because it didn't seem like they were better aiming or like doing anything else. They survived when everyone else didn't. So I guess that's better, but.
Yeah. I think it's really funny that you brought up Plo Koon, being that he's the only Jedi who had an on-screen death where he was flying a ship. So maybe he wasn't that great at it, Matthew. Or, maybe the Wolfpack is just 12 out of 10 pilots.
I don't think we can say, oh, well, Plo Koon got punked. So that's an indicate,
True.
I try as hard as I can not to downgrade those movies when I'm speaking to those who love them as much as I know you and others do. I just never bought any of the deaths in Order 66. None of them made any sense to me. But putting that aside, because again, Plo Koon, we saw him like use the Force while piloting. He shut off the Force that day. He was on vacation. He was eating a sandwich.
Yeah.
That's why the Wolfpack got him. So what else in this episode stood out to you?
The little exchange after Huyang goes down. And Sabine's like, oh my god, Huyang is down. I got it. And Ahsoka's like, yo, prioritize.
Yeah.
She's like, he's fine. Leave him. Sabine's like, leave him? Leave him, Sabine. I need you to prioritize right now. Fix the ship. Like, I'm going outside. Yeah. And Sabine's like, wait, where are you going?
Yeah, that was
So I thought that it kind of showed, like, the difference also that Chopper has made in, like, the Phoenix Squad's lives, I feel like. Because, like, of course, Ahsoka grew up with R2-D2 and C-3PO, but it's been a long time, and she probably hasn't had many, like, close droids. And, like, even Huyang, someone who is close to her, like, I guess, I take back what I was saying. She has had a lot of droids in her life that she's close with. But being that she's older and more experienced, she's already learned to prioritize in high-stress moments and not be, like, tripped up by this. And I feel like that's something she's teaching Sabine.
And during the strike, I did a couple of episodes, particularly one with Danielle, about a book called Rise of the Red Blade, where it talked a lot about Jedi Padawans and those who, like, both understand and are struggling with what it means to not form attachments. And that doesn't have to be as extreme as the, like, don't have feelings for anyone ever. But that part of it is not to allow your feelings for one individual to overwhelm your general sense of, like, the needs of all and that kind of thing. And the needs of yourself and those who are still with you. And I think that's exactly what Ahsoka shows. Ahsoka is the, I care about Huyang. I want him to be doing well, but I do not have an attachment to him. And so I am able to remember that, yes, at a later point, I will think about the fact that he might be damaged. He might even be destroyed, and that would suck. But my focus is on we have to win this battle, or else none of it matters.
Yeah, you can't bring him back if you're dead, too. That's something she kind of said.
Exactly. So one thing I want to bring up is I really liked that we learned more about the hyperspace ring. Especially because early in the episode, last time, I don't remember if it was episode 1 or episode 2, but they were kind of speculating on what could be happening, and someone specifically mentioned, like, interdimensional travel. And I kind of, like, got my haunches up there, because one thing I really like about Star Wars is that, for the most part, we don't do time travel, with the exception of a little bit in World Between Worlds, and that's how Ahsoka misses the original Star Wars trilogy set of movies, and why she's not in the War Against the Empire, but that's a whole other story. But for the most part, we haven't done that. We haven't done alternate realities. We haven't done different dimensions. And there was a little bit of that, and I was like, no, guys, Thrawn is just from a different galaxy, or like the edge of a galaxy. We don't need to do that. Yeah. And so this time they were just like, oh, no. It used to be that, like, we could travel between galaxies, and that's what this is doing. I was like, phew.
Okay. A sigh of relief, yeah.
I don't expect Star Wars to be hard science fiction. This is space opera. This is fantasy, space wizards and laser swords. But that was just a door I didn't want to cross. And so having this, because I think they also, like, there have been comments made about the Thrawn from the EU books and the Thrawn from the new books and the Thrawn from Rebels don't all line up. And I admit, I was a little worried that they were going to use some sort of interdimensional, like, these are 3 different Thrawns in 3 different dimensions. And I was like, no. So I was just glad that they were like, nope, Thrawn's just, like, in a different...
Yeah.
And the Purgles are supposed to be kind of like breaking the laws of time and space, and that's fine. But just, we kind of like, nope, this is not, we're not having a multiverse here. And I was like, okay, cool. Then I'm fine.
Yeah. No, I agree. I would not have liked that. I mean, I didn't even consider that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like... And I think the Marvel Universe, like, obviously it's very impressive. Like, Feige's done a really good job of keeping things together and making sure most storylines make sense. But, like, I know so many people who are like, I stopped watching Marvel because I just don't get it. Like, I just can't keep up. I have to watch every single movie, and there's all these things about, like, Earth version 2.0 and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, honestly, these are valid arguments. Like... I'm still enough of a fan that I do watch it and it all makes sense to me. But yeah, like when you bring in other dimensions or alternate universes or time travel, it kind of can cheapen things as far as like specifically deaths.
Yep.
You know,
very much so.
There's all these fake deaths, which just kind of like sucks and is something I would not want to see in Star Wars because I feel like the deaths in Star Wars and the impact it has on our characters is some of the most important pieces of it.
Like, I was thinking about it more and realized that, I don't know if they always intended this or if they kind of realized what the problem would be, because a lot of times Disney does drop more than one episode of a show the same night. Mm-hmm. I think if, like, the first night we had Ahsoka had ended with Sabine getting stabbed in the, like, it killed Qui-Gon, but it doesn't kill anybody else kind of way, and then we waited a week, and there was a week of thinking she might be dead, I might not have kept watching. Like, I would be so angry at the, like... Yeah. Are you trying to tell us she died or not?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I agree with you. Like, for the most part, Star Wars has really respected death. They're doing much better about that.
Speaking of, I had a crazy conversation with my coworker this morning.
Oh, yeah?
I just went in to get adjusted. I work at a chiropractor. And he was like, one of the doctors was like, oh, have you seen the new Ahsoka show? I was like, of course. I record on it weekly. Like, it's so great. He's like, yeah, I watched the first episode last night. And I go... Just the first episode? He's like, yeah. I was like,
oh boy.
What's wrong with you? He's like, what do you mean? He's like, I didn't have time to watch the second one. I like to go to bed by 9:30. I was like, so you just sat there with that cliffhanger? Like, you just let it sit? He was like, what cliffhanger? I was like, bro, you are clearly a casual fan. Mm-hmm. But he was like, oh, getting stabbed? Yeah, I mean, I'll find out. Maybe I'll watch it tonight. Maybe I'll watch tomorrow. Like, I can't handle how casual you are about this.
There are people who do not live our lives, and that is okay. And I'm going to tell myself that. But hold on, I'll be right back.
Okay, sorry. You're good. Matthew can't hear me, so I'm just here to tell you guys all that the prequels are the best parts of Star Wars, specifically the Clone Wars. And Matthew's coming back, so I'm going to shut up.
I am not hearing a word you are saying.
The words weren't for you, Matthew.
Okay.
They were for the fans.
Okay. I'll listen to them when I record. To me, my fear with something like this is always that people aren't going to really get it if they haven't watched the show. And it does seem like people who haven't watched Rebels and Clone Wars are really enjoying this so far.
Yeah, I agree.
Which I appreciate. I have had a number of people be very like, wait, why wasn't Ahsoka fighting during the Star Wars original movies, like during the Galactic Civil War? And I've had to be like, okay, it's this thing called the World Between Worlds, and honestly, like, it's a little annoying to be explaining it all the time, but I kind of get why they have it. It's such a complex, esoteric thing that was clearly done to be like, why do you have this great character named Ahsoka who didn't fight in the wars? But yeah, it's better, I think, that we're kind of leaving it out.
Yeah.
Last big thing, actually, I wanted to ask you about, and we have some listener feedback to talk about, is what do you think of the Purgles?
Great.
Yeah.
They definitely look different than I remember them in Rebels. That being said, I've only seen the last season of Rebels once because it hurt me so deeply and so horribly that I wasn't willing to watch it again.
That's very fair.
But yeah, they looked a little different, but overall, cool.
Yeah.
Appreciated them. Loved seeing them. I loved that we addressed the emotional impact it had on Sabine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because she hasn't seen them since Ezra and Thrawn disappeared.
Very much so. And I think that was really powerful to me. I think in the show, I mean, there's an extent to which when you say that the major plot point of the show finale is space whales, it's a little bit like eye-rolly. And they set it up well throughout the whole season. And I think they don't, like, I mean, they're all cartoonish by definition. It's animation, but I think we can still use that as, like, they did always look a little bit like, silly isn't quite the right word, but something like that. Somewhat majestic, but also somewhat, like, ridiculous. But that was part of the awesomeness, is that Ezra just has this great connection with animal life and semi-sentient and even fully sentient other beings. And I always worried, how would that translate to live action? And I felt like they made a conscious choice to make them seem much more majestic and otherworldly and, like, ethereal almost.
Yeah.
And so I think they were darker. I think we didn't see their faces as much, or really at all, I think, except for a brief moment or two. And it gave a very different emotional tenor, but I felt like it really worked. Like, they felt like this, like, we are now in a world beyond what any of our characters understand, that I really liked.
Yeah, I agree. Also, just on the Purrgil, I've been thinking about this, and I've been trying to remember what they're called. But when I saw the Purrgil in Rebels, I was like, aren't these kind of very similar to the Nibre? If you remember, the Nibre are basically space manta rays that eat toxic waste. And they're in, like, a few episodes of the Clone Wars where, like, Anakin has to take his squad through this really dangerous shortcut, and you go through a herd of these, like, Nibres, and if they touch you, they're electric, so your ship goes down, and all these things. So, like, when I first saw the Purrgil, I was like, isn't this the same thing? But now, obviously, they've explained it more, and the things are definitely different, but I still think it's funny. I'm like, so space is basically the ocean?
Yeah.
Like, do we have space octopods? Like, space seahorses? Like,
yeah, I think to some extent, especially space, but with these at least, hyperspace especially.
Yes,
and,
yeah, true.
Like, this has never really been explained on screen because it's esoteric as hell, and I think it would be even more boring. Like, there are science nerds who are the way I'm political nerds who want to see this stuff the way I want to see the politics, probably to most of us. But it has been explained more in the books that hyperspace isn't about going faster. It's more, I mean, it is, but it's more about going into a kind of, like, I guess here it is a little bit of a different dimension, but it's a, like, a kind of, like, network of pathways that take you from different points in space-time to different points in space-time.
It's like shortcuts.
Yeah, shortcuts, and that it is kind of an other dimension or other world that theoretically nothing can live in, but the Purrgil did live in. They can come into our own into regular space, but they definitely live primarily in hyperspace in a way I don't think the Negro did. But yeah, definitely they're these space fish that are definitely out there. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Also love the little detail we learned that not only is Jason alive and well and a healthy little toddler, or, like, you know, looks like he's like 5 or 6 by now, but he is being raised primarily by his best friend in the world, the person you definitely want to be influencing a young child who might have force powers.
Love it.
Chopper. The war criminal. And I should say, for those who don't quite get why we call Chopper the war criminal, I'm not sure how. I think it might have actually been said in the subtitles. I'm not sure. But part of the conversation that Hera had with him in those first episodes, they had the thing attached to their ship and they were flying, and Hera was saying, like, they can't drop it yet because they're over a bunch of civilians. And he basically indicates / says, why is that a problem? Yeah. So if you understand, that's why we talk about him as a war criminal.
Yeah. And I mean, if you Google Chopper kill count,
yeah.
By the time of the end of the show, he has 50,016 kills from, like, they say, like, espionage and sabotage, because he just plants, like, bombs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, like, well, now I want to know R2-D2's kill count.
Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of debate over whether, like, Luke has a higher kill count for destroying the Death Star. And there's all sorts of different nuances about how Chopper was more involved in those kills. I don't get into it, but it's a whole other realm of internet debate around Star Wars that Chopper is definitely in any conversation of the highest kill count / fighting for the right side, but not necessarily the person you want designing the most ethical and moral strategy.
Okay, sorry. I just found a really great meme. And it's, what are Astromech's views on the Galactic Civil War? R2-D2 says, both sides have blood on their hands, but I fought to bring freedom to the galaxy. Chopper says, if they're Imperial, they deserve the burial.
I like it. All right, I want to close with some great feedback we got.
Yeah.
Someone who wrote in, and I think that, like, I got this right around the... Someone who wrote in after episode 1, and I think I haven't announced it publicly at the time they wrote that we're doing these episodes. So I think they didn't even know that we're doing it, which is awesome. But I'm so glad they wrote in and that we can do their feedback now, even though they're not going to hear it for a couple months. But I have let them know that. And so they say, hello, Matthew, exclamation point, exclamation point. My name is John Paul, but I go by JP. As a lifelong Star Wars fan, I was 6 months old when my parents took me with them to see Empire Strikes Back. I was eager to find a podcast that wasn't just fanboys reliving glory days or uninformed people pretending to be informed and spreading wild speculation. I think that's a great point. We are uninformed people,
yes.
But we don't pretend to be informed, and we are very honest when we're spreading wild speculation. Mm-hmm. Your Star Wars Universe podcast, they use the abbreviation SWUP, which I appreciate.
Yep.
Absolutely fit the bill. I really enjoy listening to you and your guests, Paul, Riki, Sarah, Matthew, Erin, and Ashley, discuss everything from lore, legends, canon, ethics, alternate points of view, and everything else. When you come back to podcasting about current Star Wars after the SAG-AFTRA strike ends, while I know you're obviously going to have a whole host of things of your own to discuss, I was hoping you and your co-hosts might lend your insights to a couple of story points, plot devices that have been brought up in Ahsoka up to this point. Well, good news for you. We are recording on it, and happy to delve into feedback. And JP asks a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to just kind of raise one or two with you now, but we'll keep going through these, so hopefully we'll get more feedback. So the first thing they ask is, why would the Night Sisters have a map to Thrawn when his disappearance happened roughly 15 years after the Night Sisters were wiped out by Grievous and Dooku? My theory is there's not a map to Thrawn specifically, but a map of Purgo migration routes, and at Urza's urging, they simply took Urza and Thrawn with them to their next stop. The Night Sisters have this map because their ancestors actually came from this other galaxy and had studied the Purgil over the millennia.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Honestly, I hadn't put a ton of thought into it. Like, I guess I didn't fully catch that, like, that was specifically a Night Sister map. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I missed that. But yeah, it's a great question, because according to, like, Star Wars canon that's written in stone, the Night Sisters died during the Clone Wars.
Right.
But as we're seeing now, clearly, not only did they not all die during the Clone Wars, through, like, Marin and now Morgan, but they're not all Dathomirian, and they're not all Zabraks. Right. So, yeah, it's a great point. And they're a very old people, just, like, considering that they came from another galaxy, like, they've always been very otherworldly compared to the rest of the galaxy. You know, they don't use the Force, they use magic. It's kind of the same, but it's different. You know, like, I feel like, yeah. Go ahead.
I was saying, and we do have confirmation in some of the books that the Force exists in Thrawn's world of Chiss, which is in kind of like, it may be in another galaxy, it may be just kind of at the edges of this galaxy and another galaxy. I think that, like, the planet itself is in another galaxy, but their space extends to kind of the gray area in between. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that they don't use those same words for it, but something like the Force exists. And so, yeah, I think we talked last time about the idea that there might be a lot of these Night Sisters in different parts of the galaxy, but maybe also in other galaxies. So, yeah, I think that it's a great question and that I hadn't thought of, but those are great theories as well. And another thing he says regarding this is, what is the connection between Thrawn and Morgan? There isn't one. She wants to enlist Thrawn's help to either crush the Empire as revenge for the destruction of her people, or crush the New Republic to gain the Emperor's favor, or team up with one to crush the other. Thrawn has no idea she's coming.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, she has no connection to him. She's simply after the legend of Thrawn.
Right.
And, like, what she's heard of him.
And I think it's significant that we don't know exactly when the timeline this occurs, because, as I said, I'm currently rewatching The Mandalorian and then Boba Fett show with my partner Mary to help her get caught up so we can watch Ahsoka. And I'd forgotten that the capture of Morgan Elsbeth happens in season 1. And is it season 1?
No,
it's season 2.
2, yeah.
But it's fairly early in season 2. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole other season and a half that happens. And then Ahsoka starts while Morgan Elsbeth is being transported back to to Coruscant for trial and all that. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is happening kind of concurrent to Mandalorian Season 2. Particularly that's going to be relevant, I think, because Sabine doesn't, like, all of what Bo-Katan and Mandalorian and the Mandalorian do on Mandalore itself isn't relevant. It hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to say, like, you know, where is this all happening in the timeline? And where I'm going with that is that we do see later in that show that there are these Imperial groups that are somewhat working together, but somewhat working at odds with each other. And so it'd be interesting to kind of know, where does Morgan fit into all of that?
Yeah. Yeah, so that will be a discovery. Yeah. Her character is just an enigma to me. I'm like, I don't really know what you want. Like, when I was watching season 2 of The Mandalorian, I was like, I don't understand why you're a bad guy. Like, I don't really understand what you're doing.
Right.
Like, other than oppressing these people. I mean, obviously don't do that.
Yeah, her larger motives or why she was looking for Thrawn were pretty unspoken.
And it still is. Like, it feels very under wraps. To me, she just feels like a very mysterious character. Like, she's got a short temper. She has these allies she's working with, but she doesn't like them.
Yeah.
And she just wants Thrawn probably for, like, power. But who knows? Yeah. Maybe it's like Reva and Obi-Wan. Maybe Thrawn did something bad to her. Yeah. Maybe she's trying to track him down for her own, like, reasons, her own revenge.
Could be. Yeah, great. So great questions, JP. Thank you so much. Normally at this point I'd say please keep sending us feedback about the show, but it's over now. But you know, but also just for all of our listeners hearing it now, this is why, like, we love your feedback. Love to send it in. So let's start wrapping up the show now. So at this point, we had some technical difficulties. And the end of the show did not get recorded. But let me just do the quick wrap-up here. Erin, you can find as Lady Tano Creates. She makes incredible content on TikTok, on Twitter, on Instagram. I, of course, am the Ethical Panda, and this is the Star Wars Universe podcast. And at theethicalpanda.com, as well as in the show notes, you can find all the ways to contact us. Would love your feedback. If you're hearing this and you know, you've seen all of Ahsoka and you want to make comments on it or just this episode, send it in, and we'll definitely be doing an Ahsoka feedback episode. Theethicalpanda.com, or all the contact in the show notes. And most importantly, please think about becoming a member of the Ethical Panda podcasts. For only $5 a month, you get free access to the ad-free versions of both this and the Superhero Ethics podcast. Often, not this episode, but often you're going to get member bonus content at the end of episodes, and it's just a great way to help support the podcast. So please think about becoming a member. Please let us know what you think. Send us all the feedback, and have a great day.